Hey, and welcome back to another video. And in this week's video, we're going to take a look at alerts in SwiftUI. Alerts are a piece of UI that allow us to present actions to our users, such as deleting or confirming some sort of action. So we're going to go through all the examples and also what is possible with them as well. So we're going to, first of all, just build an example of a terms and conditions view to see how you can kind of simulate a flow where someone has to agree and confirm to some terms in your app. So let's create a new view called terms agreement view. And then within this view, we're just going to add in some UI. So I'm just going to type this out and we'll break it down. Okay, so we've got ourselves a title, which we're representing with some text, and in our content, we also have a scroll view, and within that scroll view, we've got a for each and an array that's going to repeat this string 5 times. So this is going to show this text on the screen 5 times, and then we've also got a button that we're going to use later for handling our agreed to terms. So if you want to learn more about for each and how stuff like this works, then I've got a video called breaking down identifiable and for each in SwiftUI. So now let's actually add our views onto the screen. Okay, cool. So now if you hit run, you should see that you have a scroll view with all the content, you have your terms and conditions title and your button that you can interact with as well. Okay, cool. So now let's actually add this terms agreement view onto our content view, and we'll just use our terms agreements view like so. So we can just see it in the simulator whenever we run it. So in our terms agreements view, what we actually need to do is we actually need to build some kind of source of truth that will allow us to show the alert when someone taps on agree to terms. So within the struct here, let's just create a state property called show alert that allows us to do this. So this is our source of truth for toggling whether the alert should be shown or not. So what we want to do is toggle this when someone taps on this button. So let's scroll down, and in our button, if we just type out show alert.toggle, this will actually change that value from either true or false. Cool. So when working with alerts, you have quite a few options you can use, such as simple alerts, alerts with errors that you can pass through data and whatnot. But the first example we're going to work with is a simple alert based on a Boolean. So let's actually type this one out together. So on your VStack, if you just hit enter and just type out alert, you should see that you have quite a few options that you could potentially use. So the one that we're going to use though is we're going to use the option where you're able to just specify a title and use it presented. So it's going to be quite a simple one. So the one we want to use is this one here. So if you can't find this, because obviously this list is quite big, then don't worry, you can just type it out after I'm done. So we're just going to hit enter, and then here we're going to type out agree to terms like so. And then in the is presented, we're going to use the binding bool. So we're going to say show alert. And then for the actions, we're going to have a button. So we're going to add in 2 buttons. We're going to add in a normal button and a cancel button to see what effect this has. So now within our terms agreements view, if we actually tap on this button, you should see that we now get this alert. So we have our cancel button with the role of cancel, and you can see it gets this effect where it's a bit more bold, and our normal button confirm, which doesn't have that same effect. So if you hit either one of them, nothing is going to happen because we've not implemented any logic to do anything. So you can see that by setting the role of our button to cancel, it had that effect where the text was a bit more bold. But what we can also do is we can also add in another button with a role of destructive and see what that looks like. So let's actually do that now. So if we just run this and we just tap on the button again, you'll see that this time we actually have 3 options, and we have reject, confirm, and cancel. But this time our reject button is actually in red. So you can see that depending on the role that you're using, the button will look different. And also as well, if we actually take out our cancel and just comment this out, and hit agree terms, you'll notice that we automatically get the cancel as well. So you only really want to add in this cancel button here if you want to do some kind of custom logic when someone taps on the cancel button. If not, then it's safe to leave this out and just let the system add it for you automatically. But if you notice, when we actually show our alert, it only has a title. What if we want to add some information as well, explaining some stuff within the alert? Well, you're able to do this by using the message parameter in the alert modifier. So let's just type this out again. So if we just type out .alert, we should see an option that allows us to pass in a message. Cool. So we want this one this time. And as you can see, now we have an extra parameter called message. So let's just copy and paste this stuff over. So now let's just delete our old alert that we were using before, and now we have our new one. And you can see that we've got this new message closer here. So if I actually run this and tap on it, you can see that we have our message displayed above below our title. So if you want to add some more information, you can do that. So this example was just to show you how to use alerts if you want to display some kind of, alert to give the user the option to either reject some kind of action or confirm it with a positive action or just dismiss it. So now we just looked at an example here. We wanted users to react to some kind of action, but also with alerts, you're actually able to pass in data as well and use this data within your closure to perform some kind of action. So let's create another example called File Manager View and see how we can actually pass in data from our text field into our alert. So let's just create a new SwiftUI file called File Manager View. And then within this file, let's just create a source of truth called show alert, which is what we're going to use to toggle showing and hiding our alert like we did before. And then now what we're going to do is actually add some UI onto the screen. So we're going to give people a text field to enter a file name and a button that will allow them to simulate removing a file. And if you want to learn more about text fields, then check out my video, Text Fields in SwiftUI, which you can find in the SwiftUI Sessions playlist. So we also want to capture our user input as well from these text fields. So let's create another source of truth to capture the input. So this file name is what's going to store the value that someone types in this text field. And then now let's add in the UI for our screen. Okay, cool. So now if you run this on the SwiftUI preview, you should see that you now have a text field and it's being bound to this file name. We've added the style of rounded border, so you can just see that it has a border around it. And we've also got our button to remove it. So now that we have our button, we actually want to toggle if we should show our alert or not when someone taps on the remove. So within our button action, let's just say show alert dot toggle. So now we can handle showing our alert on the screen. So let's actually type out the alert modifier that we want together. So this time we're going to attach it to our VStack. We want to have the option that allows us to pass data through. So after your padding, if you just say dot alert, and then the option that we want is this option here, where you can have the title is presented, the data that you want to pass through, actions, and a message. So let's use that now. So for the title, we're just going to say remove file. And then is presented is going to be bound to the show alert. And then presenting is going to be the file name, because that's what we want to pass through into our alert. And then for our action and message, we just want to use a closure. And we now have these arguments where we can access the file name that's being passed through. So we're just going to say in here, file and file. Cool. So now what we're going to do is in our message, we're going to give the user a message saying that they're currently planning to remove a current file at a show. So let's do that. Sweet. So now you'll see that the file name that we passed through our alert will now show within this message closure. And then within our actions, we want to create a button where the role is destructive and the label shows that you want to remove a file. So let's do that now. So now let's run this in our preview. And in our text field here, if we just type out, my info, and we hit remove, you'll now see that we actually have our information being passed through in the message here and also in our button where it says remove my info. Now obviously if you tap on this, it isn't going to do anything, but what you could do now is you could actually look for this file and delete it if you were working with the file manager or whatnot. So that's how you can pass data through alerts. So now we've broken that down and saw how we can pass data through alerts. We're actually going to see how we can display alerts for errors. So let's say you're working with an API and something goes wrong, and you want to show some kind of user feedback, so an error on the screen. Well, we can actually use alerts for this, and this is actually a common practice. So we're going to create an example of this now. So the first thing we need to do is create a new file called network error. So let's do that now. So let's create a new SwiftUI file, and we'll call it network error. And then within this SwiftUI file, we're going to create an enum called network error, and it's going to have two cases that could possibly happen. So let's do that now. Okay, cool. So now that we have our enum in place, the next thing we need to do is actually extend the network error and use the localized error protocol to give us the functionality so we can actually use this with our alert. So let's do that now. And when you're working with localized error, you're able to actually access and override some properties. And one of the properties that we want to use is error description, because this is what's used for the title with our alert automatically. So let's do that now. So you should see error description. And what you want to do is within here, we want to use a switch statement to display our own custom error description if one of these errors happens. So let's do that. So these are now going to be the titles for our alerts, and this is going to automatically be used when we call the alert modifier when we pass in and bind it to some kind of error. So now I want to create some kind of source of truth that actually simulates sending this request through the error information. So now let's create a new file called network manager that will conform to the observable object protocol. And if you want to learn more about this, then check out my video observable object and publish in SwiftUI from my SwiftUI sessions playlist. So let's do Command N, and then we're going to create a new file called network manager. Okay, cool. So now we've got our final class network manager, which conforms to observable object. And if you never saw this keyword before, the reason why I've just marked this final is it just basically means that you can't subclass this. This is the final version of this class basically. So we need to have a published property within this manager that tells us and allows us to read from our error, so we can actually get the error title to show in our alert. So let's create this now. So the reason why we've marked this with private set is because we don't want anyone to be able to actually modify this from without the scope of this class. And also as well, the reason why it's optional is because when you run this for the first time, it's completely possible that there isn't an error. So there's no point of setting it with an error if there isn't one already. So now that we've done that, we actually need to have another published property within this class for handling whether our alert shows up or not. So let's actually add in a published property called hasError, and this is what we're going to use to actually fake our API call and handle showing an alert on the screen. So let's do that now. So by default, hasError is going to be false because an error hasn't actually occurred yet, and when it does, we'll actually toggle this value. And the reason why this is not a private set is because this is going to be bound to our alert modifier, and it needs access to actually read and write to it as well. So if you make this private set, you'll actually get an error on your alert modifier. So now we actually need to use a function to simulate fetching some data. So we're going to create a function that will fetch data, and it will have a ½ second delay to actually set the error is true for hasError, and also set a end error for our error published property. So let's do that now. Okay, cool. So we have our function fetch, and what we're saying here is that after now, so now, right now, after 1.5 seconds from now, we're going to set our hasError to true because there is an error, and we're also going to set our error property here to be a bad request. So this is the error that we're going to simulate. So now let's actually create an instance of this within a new file called fake request view, and we'll create an instance of our network manager as well. So let's do that now. So SwiftUI view, So now within our fake request view, let's create an instance of our network manager. Cool. So this is now the manager that we're going to use and source of truth that we're going to use to listen to changes to this fake API call that we're going to make. So what we want to do is that when our text field appears on the screen, we actually want to call that fetch function. So on the text, let's add in an onAppear, and then directly within the perform, we're going to pass in our fetch function like so. And the reason why we're able to do this is because the parameter for it is void, and also our fetch function doesn't take any parameters, so they both match the function signature. So now what we need to do is actually handle showing this alert. So below our onAppear, let's actually type out the alert modifier, but this time we want to actually use the option that takes in an error. So below here, if we just say alert, and if you just scroll down, you should see there's an option here where you're able to see the is presented, error, and also the actions and message. So let's do that now. So on the is presented, we want this to be bound to our manager's has error property. So this will dictate whether our alert is shown and whether this is true or false. So on the error property here, we want this to use the error property that we declared in our network manager, like so. Now the reason why we don't need to bind this to this is because the error property isn't actually changing the value. All this is doing is just reading the error that you pass into the alert modifier. So there's no reason to add in the $symbol beforehand. So on the actions, you're now able to see that we're able to access the error that gets passed through our alert. So let's use this now. So we're going to do this first of all on our message. So we're going to first of all just say that something has gone wrong. And then in our action, what we're going to say here is we're just going to add in a button. We're just going to add in a button to retry. So you see that we're not actually using this yet, and there is a reason for that, and I'm going to get to it in a second, because right now I just want to show you what this looks like when it just grabs the title that we defined in the error description. So now let's actually just run this and see what happens. So if I just run this now, you'll see that after 1.5 seconds, we now get the alert, and it's actually using the title that we defined in our network error here. So the request failed. You can see that it's using that, and it's showing our message that we defined here in here. But what I actually want to do now is I actually want to add my own custom message to this network error, and also a suggestion as well. So what we're going to do is in our network error enum, we're actually going to create 2 new computer properties within it that allows us to access these properties. Now it's also worth noting that localized error already has some properties that you can use, but I'm just going to create my own to show you in this example now. Cool. So what we have now is we now have a computed property here called message, which returns a string, and depending on the case, we're going to display either one of these 2 messages, and we also have a computed property here called suggestion that's going to return this string here as well. So now if we go into our fake request view, now we're actually able to use those computed properties that we've defined from our error because they're an extension on it. So let's do that now. So on our button, rather than us having retry, we're going to say error dot suggestion, and then on our message we're going to say error dot message, like so. So if we just run this, you should see now that it's actually pulling. If I just pin this, you should see now that it's actually pulling the message from our error that we defined, and also as well the suggestion. So if I tap on this button again, you'll see that it just repeats the whole thing again. So one thing to note is that we actually defined another case here called fail to decode, and that's not actually being used at all. So let's actually see how we can use this now. So if we go back into our network manager, what we're just going to do is just add in some logic to decide on whether a number is a multiple of 2, and if it is, then we're going to show either one of those 2 error cases. So let's do that now. We're saying here that on the integer between 1 to 5, if it's a multiple of 2, then we're going to show here a bad request, or else we're going to show a failed to decode. So depending on whether it is odd or even between this range, we're going to show either one of these 2 errors. So let's actually retry this again now. And you can see here it says fail to decode. And if we just tap on the button again, it says fail to decode again. So we just try that again. You can see now that we get a request failed because it's now hit a even number. So at the start of the video, you saw me create these out into separate views, and the reason why I did that is because if you want to actually test this out, all you need to do now is actually just copy and paste those views, such as your fake request view or your file manager view, within the content, and you can just literally just swap them out. So that's everything in this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave me some feedback in the comment section below. Also, as well, if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to get updates whenever I release a new video. That's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.